everybody, and welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. My name is Sam. As always, I'm joined by my hero and counterpart, James Anir. James, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic, Sam. Heading up to Tennessee tomorrow. So,
Well, enjoy that drive. I will not be on it with you, but I will raise caffeine to you while you make that drive. Today, we are answering the question that for many, they might be wrestling with this question right now. This might actually be an immensely timely topic for those that are wrestling with, do we separate or do we just keep marching forward? For those of you that are on the other side of whether or not you should separate, there's going to be some great review in today's podcast because you might look back and go, "Oh, I'm so glad we did this," or "I'm so glad we did not do that." But the question is, when is it time for a therapeutic separation? So, James, what is a therapeutic separation?
so it's really an intentional look. It differs from a what most people think of as separation, in that obviously there's therapeutic piece to it. Most separations are really just a prelude to divorce. These are with the idea that let's do as much repair as possible, see how things are going. If it happens to be that you go in a different direction in terms of going towards divorce, then okay, but this gives you the best chance of possibly repairing or even probably repairing your partnership. So it has to be intentional. It's got to be planned, and there's got to be a predetermined period of time that the couple chooses to live separately in order to accomplish mutually agreed upon goals, both individual and for the coupleship, with professional help. And really, this is one of those things where you really need professional help on this. Even though we're going to really sort of dive deep into this today, please don't do it on your own. You really need some guidance here, because these goals are extremely important.
The thing I love about what you just said is a therapeutic separation is not just a prelude to a divorce, which oftentimes separation is almost, it may not be the death nail, but it is the beginning of the end. So maybe talk just a little bit different about why this is not just a prelude to a divorce.
Well, because it is with the intent of getting back together as a healthy couple with the intent to move forward. So what it's doing is it's working on some really important aspects of what's going on for each individual, as well as what's happening within the coupleship, and how you're kind of doing this or doing this instead of this. So this is the goal, which is called interdependence. So very healthy. There's a key to this. Obviously, it's got to be well planned. It also needs to be written, signed, and dated. There's a reason for that. Both people are committing to it. Obviously, it's not a court document. This isn't actually a legal separation. A legal separate, you can do that. Not
Hmm.
every state does it. Legal separations are really typically done for financial or insurance considerations, and only a court can do it. Well, you can do it with a mediator, but it has to be signed off by a judge, and it creates legal boundaries around concrete things. This is really not that. But signed and dated says, "Hey, I'm making a commitment here. I'm putting my X on it, and I'm committing to doing this."
Because it has to be structured, it has to be ordered. So, okay, why do we do a therapeutic separation? Because I think lots of people would ask themselves, well, maybe we should therapeutically separate right now, or maybe we're just dealing with flooding or activation and we're just having a difficult time. But why do we go through a therapeutic separation?
So there are a number of really good reasons. And so I'm going to try to outline those pretty strongly and concretely, because as you said, it could be something where things aren't going well in that moment. You don't want to make a big decision like this on based on feelings that may or may not be there moving forward, but certainly are very intense in the moment. So I think the first one would be, if your relationship is seriously unstable. By that I mean there's violence, and remember, domestic violence doesn't mean necessarily all physical. Definitely can be emotional. If you're feeling unsafe all the time, you're feeling like your life is potentially threatened here. If there's raging, if there's constant arguing, and there just seems to be no way out of that, that's a pretty definitive thing. Here's one for those of you with kids, especially younger kids, but say into their teens. If they're being negatively affected continually and badly, you really have to make this consideration: what is going to be best for them? If the unfaithful is still acting out, or in my mind, and still in contact with the affair partner, and that's ongoing, and there's no, okay, that needs to be done, basically, because what betrayed partner can live with that? If the unfaithful is relapsing, so let's say there are periods of sobriety followed by relapse, and that just seems to be going on and on and on, so that it's not really changing, so that it's not ending, and it's constantly happening at a pretty periodic rate. That's a really good reason. If the unfaithful is not engaging in recovery activities or therapy or coaching, or is doing it really sporadically, that really tells you where's the commitment here, and maybe we need to be apart for a while you get a hold of that for yourself. If the unfaithful continues to disrespect the betrayed, judging them or creating discomfort for them, including not working on empathy, and it also includes unabating victimhood, right? So things like, when is this going to be over? That's stuff that, if that keeps happening, that's also a good reason. Gaslighting, lying, and deception are continual. So remember, gaslighting is trying to change the betrayed's reality. No, that's not real. That's not happening. This is what's happening. So lying and deception are continual with no sign of abatement. Notice a lot of these are, hey, here are these actions that the unfaithful keep doing, and it's not changing. If one or both partners want the separation for whatever reason, of course, you're going to want to discuss that with your helping professional or professionals to gain clarity as to why and what your personal goals are going to be. Then it could be healing, just to get out of the fog, to be able to manage the overwhelm, to figure out how to feel safe. All of those are really good reasons, and it only takes one of the partners wanting it. And lastly, to give your partner time and space to find themselves, to recover, to find safety, and feel grounded in themselves again.
Because when we talk about reasons to, alternatively, a reason not to is just to escape having to have conversations, right?
Yeah,
Just maybe wanting to just act out. In those cases, it's like, no, 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 hold on. What are we trying to do? Hence the whole term of therapeutic separation, right?
exactly. So that really takes some analysis on the part of the unfaithful, especially when they're looking at, oh, I think we should separate. If it really is, I think we should just separate because I can't tolerate this anymore, or I want to be able to do what I want to do sexually or intimately.
It can also be that we unfaithful sometimes want to punish the betrayed, right? We kind of almost in a victim mentality, we just want to go, look, if you're just going to keep asking me to do this and do this work, you know what? Let's just separate it. So it can be a punishing move as well, right?
And if you think about it, that's a threat too, because it's a threat to their safety and security and stability. So if it's a manipulation of, hey, we just need to get a separation, then that's really trying to put a partner on their heels, right? To go, oh man, no, I don't want that, and then sort of capitulate. And
Right.
that is not a healthy thing to do.
No, not at all. And as we've talked about the right reasons or what have you, so what can we expect from a therapeutic separation? And this is really, really important for those that are pondering, like, man, Should I do this? Because it's terrifying to think about it, to do a therapeutic separation. I mean, chills will go up and down an unfaithful and a betrayed's whole entire body thinking about this. However, when you do it right, when you do it with support, when you have accountability and you have an expert walking you through it, what can both parties expect from doing it the right way?
I think primarily we can say it creates safety in the relationship, especially if volatility exists. And that's really, that sense of safety is for both betrayeds and for unfaithfuls, because unfaithfuls, maybe not knowing everything that they need to know yet, can feel very unsafe in an environment that is unstable because it may, for instance, reflect how they grew up. So that safety is about the relationship and about each individual. Here's a biggie. It can break the trauma bond. So there can be this interaction, this interplay that goes on that is all based in trauma, not the betrayal trauma, sure, but also this interaction that is really based around I better do this so he or she doesn't react this way. Okay, and I'm going to react that way if they react, and it just happens without thought. So it's breaking that. The trauma bonds can be as big as abusive relationships. That's where the term originally came from. What we're talking about here is I think there's always, almost always in any coupleship, there are negative bonds as well as positive. So we're talking about those negative bonds here that we're trying to break, that enmeshment between the couple, so that guess what, you can be these two beautiful, when you've done the work, these two beautiful individuals who then can come together, be like this. It's much better for the coupleship. We've talked a lot in the past about changing neural pathways in the brain. And there are these sort of what I just described as that back and forth, that traumatic back and forth is really that trigger reaction cycle, right? Okay, this person triggers me. This is my reaction. That reaction triggers this person. Then they have a reaction, and that triggers back and forth until boom, it can blow up. So when we're separated and we're working on those things that trigger us, we start creating that new neural pathway that allows that to dissipate, and we can see and take the other person. You also learn how to communicate here so that you're not triggering. So everything becomes a lot smoother and a lot calmer. And within that, we're going to work on individual issues. So whatever our deeper drives are, we've talked about that before too. But there's always something under it. And that's the feeling. There's always something
Right.
under that. That's what drives it. So it's what are these drives that I have that make me react that way or make me behave that way? Okay, so that's good emotional health. We're uncovering our traumas, our compulsions, why I did those things. And that's really important. We can also work on, as part of that, our own individual growth, recovering our original self, because we get so far away from who we really are and when we're acting outside of our integrity. There's also, this is kind of that scary part and in part that you were talking about, there's a chance to reevaluate the direction of the relationship. How is this going? Do we want this to continue? But also part of it, I think that's very positive, is if it's been going in this direction, maybe we want it to go in that direction. We don't want it to continue in this direction, but maybe we don't want to go back to the old direction, which is only a few degrees off. We want to go in a whole new direction. So you get to reevaluate that in this time. You get to learn new skills, new tools. So individually, but also as a couple, because part of the separation is therapeutically coming together and working as a couple and working on some of these. Communication's huge. Remember, we talked about, hey, here are the 4 really negative communication styles and the one really good one.
Mhm.
This is a great place to learn that. We also learn how to collaborate on things instead of sort of one person saying, let's do this, the other giving in or demanding that it goes a different way. And I think this is the biggest, the chance to gain shared meaning and develop shared goals. And that's sort of that new direction piece. How is that new direction? Not just there's our goal, but sharing the meaning in that we can grow, we can join as a couple and really become so much more than we've ever been. So there's a lot that you're hopefully working on before any kind of a separation, but certainly when you go into a therapeutic separation, this is an awful lot. You can see very clearly the difference between this and just not living together.
Well, and between this and just winging it, right? There's lots of us that we've just kind of said, let's just wing it. Let's just see how it goes. And we try and DIY it, right? And we think that, well, we'll get together, we'll date, we'll just read a book. But a therapeutic separation really entails having somebody walk you through it, like an expert therapist or coach that knows what they're doing, that can help you be able to create the agreement that you talked about. And that agreement, so that people get a better idea, what would be in this type of an agreement?
So first of all, that, like you said, working with the therapist or coach, somebody who really knows what this is to create the agreement. I mean, you can certainly listen to this and take notes and sort of do an outline, and certainly that will help you. But frankly, when you work with a therapist or coach who's educated in this, they're going to have templates, but they'll also adjust those templates to your specific needs and then, help you create those apart and together. They're going to also facilitate the check-ins because communication is going to be a big deal in this, and we'll get to that. And then obviously, because they're the helping professionals, they're going to help the two partners work on their stuff. Creating an agreement is always done with the therapists or coaches as a mediator. And I pluralize that because each person should have their own. It's very hard for a single therapist or a single coach to manage this. It can be done, but it is really, really beneficial when there are two who can put their minds together and their hearts together and really help couple this way. The agreement at a minimum has to include these pieces, right? So a stated reason why you're separating. This has to be agreed on. So that's why you have people help you prepare it. A mission statement is really important. So that's about your individual and shared or collaborated on goals. The timeline, super important. How long is the separation going to be? Bear in mind, it's not necessarily going to be fixed. You're choosing sort of a random time period. I've seen them as short as 2 weeks. It's so questionable whether 2 weeks or a month is really going to do anything. It's not even really a month that may be long enough to reset a neural pathway. 2 weeks. Usually when I see them, or when I've seen them from whether they're our clients or not, it's because two people just can't tolerate being on their own and they come back together without really the all the goals being met. Typically, you're going to be looking at 3 months, 6 months, a year. Sharon and I were much longer, but there was a reason for that. We didn't have help. There was kind of no such thing at the time, or that we knew of or could find. And we were therapists, right? But we still couldn't find any resources with that. So we had to kind of figure it out as we went. Fortunately, we did it really well. So, but it just took longer than is absolutely necessary at this point. You have to have in that agreement what your individual goals are. So my individual goals, Sharon's individual goals, so each person. And then here's a lovely one, the goals that you wish for each other. And that's a chance to show your heart. It's also a chance to say, these are the things that would help me. Financial piece is big. So, how are you going to manage your money, your accounts? Are there going to be some agreed spending limits for each person before you have to ask each other? But it's not the time to address like financial issues overall. That's a separate part of couples work, post-betrayal couples work. Big one, living arrangement. Who leaves? Who stays and who leaves? That's important. That can depend on, well, here's a big one. Do you have the financial wherewithal to be in separate places? We are going to do something on an in-house separation at a later time. It's really too big to cover in this because there are some real specifics to that, because it's so much harder if you're in the same house to really do this kind of emotional separation that needs to happen. So it can depend on whether you can afford it. Also depends on, do you have somewhere to go? How's that going to look? If you are in separate houses, does the person who's not in the house, when do they have access to the house? For example, for household maintenance or to get things, working out the logistics so you're not just showing up at the same time, because you really don't want that. That's going to disrupt the purpose of this. Communication and contact, outlining that. Always with this, go by what your healing professionals say, because they're going to be on top of it. We go with, so just as a general, it can be shorter or longer, no contact whatsoever for the first 2 weeks or more if recommended, except for agreed upon logistical stuff. So like if kids are involved, obviously, if there's something coming up to do with the household that perhaps needs to be communicated about, if it can't be worked out beforehand. In general, communication during this whole period is going to be about logistics only, except for when you're doing something with your therapist or coach. So what about how to do it? Emails tend to be the best way because they're more easily limited, right?
Right.
They don't get out of hand nearly as easily as texts can. Texts also, it's just remembering both, they're typed, they're written. Getting emotions across, emojis notwithstanding, is very, very difficult. And both parties are going to be really sensitive during this. This is one of the reasons you keep it to logistical. Texts are just notoriously bad because they can get out of hand so fast. What do you mean by that? Right? Boom, boom. One or both are heading down the wrong path there. Phone, yeah, I say mostly in emergencies only. In person, you better have a darn good reason for that, except when it's done with a therapeutic reason, i.e., one that you've been told by your coach or your therapist to do that. And it can be for recovery check-ins. This is not the time to do periodic check-ins that maybe you've been trying, like Thanos or something like that. It's not for that unless your professional says, yeah, I want you to keep doing that. And then when to do recovery checkups. So one of the exceptions to this in terms of recovery check-ins is if there's a relapse. Whatever your current rule is, you got to tell me in 24 hours, tell your partner, right? In 24 hours or 48 hours, you got to tell your sponsor first, your therapist first, and then tell your partner. However that is set up, and it needs to be clearly defined, stick to that rule. Don't change that. There's no excuse because you're not living in the same house. Children, it's got to be written out. What's visitation? What are the duties? They need to be split. Keeping everything as much the same as possible for the kids is really vital. They need as much stability as possible, and a therapeutic separation is already going to disrupt that. And they have to be told that's a whole separate topic that you need help with. It has to be age appropriate. When are you going to go to therapy? When are you going to get coaching? Each of you at least once a week with a therapist or coach trained in betrayal trauma. So you need, if it's not one of us or me and Sharon, go to the absats.org website. They've got therapists and clinicians and coaches listed who can help. And then as a couple, getting that, are they going to be separate professionals or both individuals, helpers together? That's going to be a decision. If you've got two different ones, they could get together, or is it just a separate couples therapist? And that's the frequency that's going to be really determined by those therapists that are and coaches that are involved. But at least once in mid-separation, because you got to find out how it's going.
Right.
There are always going to be couples issues that need to be addressed, and there needs to be time to grow individually as well. So that has to play into that. You can see how complicated this can get so quickly. How about celibacy? Yes. or it's not really a therapeutic separation. There have to be clearly defined guidelines. So if there have been, okay, well, I don't want you hanging out, if it's like the boundary is don't hang out with friends at a bar because there are all kinds of dangers in a bar, then that remains one of the things. Of course, no dating. So following existing partner boundaries, and if they don't exist in this situation, you create more or create them. Abide by whatever is in your three circles. We talked about that several podcasts ago. That inner circle being absolutely concrete, will not do these things. The middle circle being these are really dangerous things. And the green circle or outer circle being these are really positive things that I need to be doing. You stick with those the same as you were sticking with them, hopefully. Well, obviously, if you're going into therapeutic separation, you might not have been, but
Mm.
they are important guidelines, right? And then one thing that really has to be in here is what goals need to be reached before the end of the separation. So, for example, lasting sobriety, engagement in the process of the separation. Another big one, what are the deal breakers? If this happens or this doesn't happen, it's done or it has to continue on.
So when it comes to reintegration, what are some considerations? What are some metrics that they can look at to, as they're maybe contemplating a therapeutic separation, before they even get into it? What are some reintegration considerations, if you will, that they can have before that happens?
Right. Were the points that were set up in the therapeutic separation met? So the agreed upon points, were they met? What are the boundaries going to be moving forward from there? Now you can prepare that beforehand, and they may be subject to change depending upon how well this has gone. An agreement for continued therapy and coaching, the frequency of that, and continued recovery work, both individual and couples. You're going to want to consider here what the biggest concerns you both have are and discuss those with your helping professional. That's both for reintegration and for the therapeutic separation.
Makes great sense. So, as the betrayed, for example, looks at this therapeutic separation, we want to be mindful of some of the things that they could really be afraid of that could hit their radar that they might be encountering. What are some things that might go through their mind? Because this is really tough. This is not something that you just wing. This is something that takes some real strategy. But what are some things that the betrayed will come in contact with feelings wise that could be very alarming?
I think it's based in trust. The trust, if you're going into therapeutic separation, the trust, highly likelihood that it has not been reestablished. Uh, Perhaps a bit, but certainly not enough to obviate the fear that the unfaithful is going to act out. Because it's just going to be licensed to act out. Where he or she isn't here, they're living separately, then I'm not in control of that. The difficult part to understand about that is that you being present doesn't ensure that anyway. You've never really had that control as much as you've tried. It's always been up to the unfaithful whether they act out or whether they don't. And that is a really hard thing to hear. I know. And I feel for you so hugely on that because I really wish that could be the case, that you could say, okay, I have control over that. And so that's also part of that fear and why that fear of separating can be so huge for a betrayed. Believe it or not, for somebody who's early working on their recovery and unfaithful, it can be frightening too, for a number of reasons. There can be loneliness. And bear in mind, I'm going to name a lot of emotions here that the betrayed could feel as well, right?
Right.
But part of the fear for an unfaithful is, am I going to be able to stay on this path that I've started of recovery? Because when I was at home, maybe I was able to hold on to that more strongly because here's my partner right here. Now, I may not have been acting right in terms of being empathetic and creating a safe environment, not being subject to my emotions and my feelings and so on, thus raging or whatever that looks like. Maybe I've been working really well on ABC's 1, 2, 3s of initial recovery, stopping the behaviors, and that can be really scary because now I'm going to be on my own. How am I going to control that? The fact is that if you've been doing a good job of that and you've got lots of people helping you, especially people in the same situation or have been going through it, you're going to be okay. It's actually what I would call a positive challenge. But some of the feelings that both partners might feel, abandoned, rejected, highly anxious. This is going to be something that is anxiety causing. There's almost no way out of it. Partly the anxiety, remember the negative and positive. Partly it's going to be that fear, anxiety, but also that anxiety of I've got to grow now. And that growth does cause anxiety. So you have to really think about what's causing my fear or what's causing my anxiety here. It can be triggering for both parties in the way that we just talked about, anger. And that can be a lot of self-anger, but it can also be for a betrayed. Look, this now too. And there is a huge positive for the betrayed, which is why you're doing it if you're doing this. That anger can be there. You can have two conflicting emotions at the same time.
Right. Absolutely.
So feeling lost, not knowing what comes next, what to do, guilt, feeling like a failure. Here's the deal. You can also feel some peace and some happiness. Happiness, actually, if you define it, really actually comes from the word to happen, which means peace or contentment, but okay. But if you do feel some peace or some lightness, you can also get accompanying guilt with that. I shouldn't feel this way.
I think it's safe to say that during a therapeutic separation, it's not a time for big decisions. It's not a time to be contemplating big investments, selling, buying a home, things like that. I mean, everything needs to be pretty much put on hold except the relationship. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Obviously, if there's something that goes wrong with the house, something like that, yeah, okay, that could be expensive, but that has to be done. Or what you're talking about really there is wholesale things like buying a new car or having elective surgeries. We've seen some people go out and get some electric, sorry, some plastic surgery, right? And they're getting stuff done, or I almost got tattoos. I don't need to go into what they, well, I could. Arrows like pointing forward. I'm going to have arrows pointing forward. My sponsor thankfully said, wait a year. Guess what? Never got them. Or even during this therapeutic separation, divorce, not really on the table unless you've worked that through with your therapists and coaches. If that's a decision then to be made, then it should be at the end of that separation. So just to give the separation its due, assuming there were no deal breakers. And then here's the beauty of this whole thing that I'll kind of wind up my part of this with. When it is properly planned and followed through on, therapeutic separation can be truly healing. It can become a platform from which a new relationship can be born that has true intimacy, deep connection, and basically give both of you a new lease on life.
Because there's no reason that two adults need to be stuck in a situation with no way out. There are options and there are choices. And for those of you that are watching and listening, our hope today is to be able to have given you some practical insight into what the right kind of help can do for you and what a therapeutic separation may need to look like. Because if you're stuck and if you can't gain ground, and if you are just in a situation where you feel like, I don't know what to do, if you go through what we said, if you really took notes or go back and take notes, there is a way through, right, James? You don't have to be stuck in a situation without any hope or any direction.
Yeah, I think, if you want an example, look at Sharon and me. Without that therapeutic separation, I don't think we would be where we are. I don't even know if we would be together, honestly. And we had help. Granted, we didn't have people who knew what therapeutic separation was about, but I had a brilliant sponsor who always had Sharon in mind all the way along. We did have therapists. Then we had Dana, my therapist who just passed, but we had her as a couples therapist doing imago work, which is later work. It's not to be done right now, please, but it's brilliant work because then that's that new growth, right?
Sure.
It absolutely, we had all those things, and if it weren't for that separation, we would not be. Well, I wouldn't be here doing this with you.
And I think it's vital that for those of you that are in a situation where you just feel like he or she keeps doing this, there's a point where you need to contemplate a therapeutic separation. It does not mean the marriage is over. It does not mean, well, we might as well just go get attorneys. Not at all. This is about helping you know beyond a shadow of a doubt what your next move is going to be. So you have to give the opportunity for the therapeutic separation to work. That's just the bottom line. So, if we can be of any service, by all means, please leave a comment. We'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. You can email us at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. We're so thankful for many of you who have just recently started following us and watching our videos. We do all we can to support you. It may take a little while for us to answer your email, and if it's really long, that's going to make it even harder for us to get to you. Please understand, we answer our own email. We're thrilled to do what we do. We will see you next time on Ask the Unfaithful.